day, we faced untenable odds, but nonetheless held our ground. This town, this place where we made history in 1985, and where we now make history all over again with an ideal work at our home of religious freedom in Portland. If our victory in Portland is now legend in the world of Scientology, let's also never forget the lessons it taught and the tradition, the winning tradition it forged. Because make no mistake, here was the turning point. Here was the proverbial live or die in the attempt. Here was the moment we determined our fate into eternity. So yes, while many amongst you may have been there marching in these streets, your voices echoing throughout this city, even then you hardly knew the magnitude of forces aligned against you. Then again, some amongst you were but children, packed in a Winnebago by your parents for what would be one hell of a field trip. And finally, there is our newest generation of Scientologists, now young adults, advancing up the bridge, or even working in our orgs, from which the obstacles we had to surmount are almost unimaginable in light of how far we have come in these past 28 years. So, when one hears the phrase, all the forces of evil joined together in a last-ditch effort to bring about our total destruction, well, one could think that statement a bit overblown, overdramatic. Except in this instance, it's true. And here is the cast of characters that comprise those forces of evil. Since 1950, the sites had declared as their enemy in the aftermath of Dianetics the modern science of mental health. They next enlisted the Food and Drug Administration to condemn our e-meters. The FDA, in turn, enlisted the IRS to scrutinize finances and deny tax exemption, after which the IRS enlisted foreign governments in countries without a First Amendment to initiate inquiries and legislation against us. Now, advanced through the decades. Yes, despite momentary losses here and there, some small, some large, with LRH at the helm, we always yet prevailed. Or rather, I should say, we survived. Because while we survived those assaults, the enemy didn't just go away. They increased their intensity. They threw more of their not inconsiderable resources against us. And finally, in the early 1980s, they all teamed up. And why that moment? Because they well knew LRH had left management lines to travel and complete his researches. In other words, and for the first time in history, the church would have to stand on its own. And besides, knowing LRH was unavailable, what better way to target him than in his absence? And even beyond all that, there was a confluence of events that made it all the perfect timing from the perspective of the enemy. First, there was the old Guardian's office responsible for defending the church. To say they went PTS would be putting it mildly. And when their misconduct was discovered, the government figured they could drive the final nail in our coffin. Except for the fact that before the government could make their move, the culprits were isolated and thrown out. The IRS response? To target the very church executives who had cleaned house and inadvertently foiled the IRS plot. Thus would begin what became the largest and most expensive criminal investigation in IRS history. Moreover, it was conducted in an era of dirty tricks by the dirtiest agents of them all. Black bag jobs, surveillance, wiretaps, you name it. But of course, none of it led anywhere because there was nothing improper to be found. Next, with LRH off the lines, there were those still in the church who had bided their time to seize power for their own benefit and profit. Infamous names today. And if you heard Ron's Journal 38, Today and Tomorrow, The Proof, where he spoke of those rats, well, those are the people he was talking about. Their plot? First, instigate an internal mutiny, then grab the pieces by taking over the church bank accounts and divide it amongst themselves. Sound incredible? Well, it's a true story. But again, that same plot was foiled by the same unnamed executive, and they molecular and chemical, and hence, from the psych's perspective, religion, faith, and the fact that there is something beyond this material world are all but euphoric fantasy, imagination, and delusion. Or as the psychs were stating in 1985, what cannot be proven by material science can only be the product of brainwashing. And that was their theory, that religion was brainwashing. They began targeting all religions. They even brought suits against Christian churches on the charge of clergy malpractice, attempting to punish ministers for providing religious counseling instead of sending their parishioners to a psychiatrist. But of course, what better target for the psychs than new religions? And what new religion more prominent than Scientology? All of which brings us to the legal arena and the filing of civil lawsuits. And it went like this. First, find someone new to the religion with antagonistic familial connections. Next, and for a sizable fee, kidnap that individual and forcibly deprogram her with communist techniques from the Korean War. Then use that deprogrammed victim to file a civil lawsuit claiming religious beliefs and practices of the church are actually secular but can't be proven scientifically. And thus, said beliefs and practices should be judicially ruled a fraud. And with dozens of deprogrammings nationwide, there were soon dozens of civil lawsuits alleging that very thing. And if it all seems convoluted and complex so far, then once again enter the IRS for the final twist. To prevent the church from investigating these victims and the circumstances of their complaints, which is to say, deprogramming, the IRS named every one of them a government informant, which by another twist is to say we couldn't investigate those victims who were now suing us because that would be tampering with a federal informant. And all those people I mentioned that were kicked out of the church for being corrupt and trying to seize the church and its finances, well, the IRS brought them on board, labeling them government informants as well. In fact, the corrupt IRS agents even gave them a deal. If they would testify against the church, particularly its leading principals, and most specifically the very person who kicked them out, the IRS would throw that person in jail. And when the dust settled, those who were kicked out could take over the church and have all the money, then it was left over. Now, while a field report on every front of battle across the U.S. could fill a book, all you really need to know is this. The entire cast of characters I've just introduced all came together here in 1985 in Portland, Oregon. It was to be their test case, and they planned to take their hoped-for victory in Portland and use it as a precedent across the United States and actually the rest of the world. So, while you may have heard of a case concerning a woman who spent only a few weeks in a church mission for a communication course, well, here's what it was really all about. In the first place, it should have been a one-week trial, but the judge granted a pretrial motion by the opposition to let anybody and everybody testify about anything and everything. Thus ensued an 11-week trial. The actual plaintiff hardly testified. After all, what could she say? She'd hardly been in the church mission more than a few times. But all those people thrown out of the church, every one of them served as a witness, even though they'd never even met the woman. Then, when we attempted to expose the fact they were all bitter about their ouster and aligned in an evil conspiracy to take over the church, that was disallowed since they were protected government informants. So we next went one step further, presenting videotaped evidence of a police-sanctioned surveillance exposing their primary witness plotting to forge documents and plant those documents in the church to implicate church officials. Yes, all of that clear as day on video. But then the judge disallowed it to be shown to the jury, especially since the IRS phoned into the judge's chambers and said they were conducting a government operation, and that witness we caught on video was their protected informant. Next, the psychs took the witness stand. And what they did is go through our materials, page by page, and then testified they were accordance with psychological or psychiatric textbooks. Yeah, no kidding. And just to put the icing on the cake, the IRS dirty tricks were ongoing, as in jurors receiving prank phone calls in the middle of the night. And of course, who do you think those jurors thought were making the prank calls? Especially when you consider they were viewing a trial that was reminiscent of the Spanish Inquisition, where every enemy witness was given free rein to voice their opinion on how horrible Scientologists are. And finally, did I forget? It wasn't just the church that was on trial. For even though he was unavailable, though he had never met or even corresponded with the individual, the court decided to try LRH himself in absentia. And so we come to the cataclysmic moment of this story, because when the jury returned their verdict, finding us liable and rendering their judgment to a person who had donated $2,000 to the church, the figure was a staggering $39 million. And so, yes, it seemed to one and all the enemy's plan had worked. Or had it? Because after all, there is a once and final chapter to this tale. It all begins on the 17th of May, 1985, at 5:19 in the afternoon, when that $39 million judgment broke like a thunderclap. At which point, there was every reason for concern, because let there be no doubt, that judgment would have bankrupted us. And that's not even counting the 100-plus cookie-cutter suits scheduled for trial in the ensuing year. All of them with the same dog and pony traveling show of psychs and apostates, not to mention the IRS, who would now use those civil court decisions to justify their criminal investigation and charges they planned on bringing. Well, beyond all that, there were only trifling concerns, as in a complete destruction to the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, not to mention the eternity of every Scientologist. So yes, you might say the chips were down, and the wheel was spinning when we assembled at our central headquarters in the Portland Plaza condo at Clay and Market Streets. And yes, there was the usual legal talk of appeals, how this won't stand, and so forth. But with all that was at stake, oncoming attacks we already knew about, and even more attacks in the planning stages we would only discover later, well, something else, something more than the usual legal process was obviously needed. Now, while I could give you the verbatim quotations of what was said in that Portland condo, some of the adjectives used are not really appropriate for a public event such as this. But needless to say, a decision was made, because just as there are two ways to overcome the reactive mind, so too their dynamic aberration. One can run it out, or one can pull himself up by the bootstraps and rise superior to it. So to that degree, the astronomical judgment actually accomplished something else. It woke a sleeping giant. And the message was simple. It was time for everyone to be a Scientologist in action, all of which underscored what we next launched. Specifically, a call to arms for the greatest freedom crusade this city and indeed this country had ever seen. Because if they would not hear us in the courts, then they would certainly see and hear us in the streets. And it would indeed signify who we are and what we stand for, so that the entire world would take notice. Well, as for those sitting on the fence, the decision time was now. You were either with LRH or you weren't. The choice was black and white. There were no shades of gray. And so it was. The announcement was made that very same day in our old Portland, Oregon, Southeast 9th Street, attended by all local press. And so it was. Not more than 3 hours thereafter, the first of 15,000 Scientologists began assembling in Lonsdale Park, directly opposite the courthouse. Whereupon, candlelight vigils, freedom concerts, and a freedom parade tirelessly circling the Multnomah courthouse, it was soon national and international news, building momentum by the day until it was also 2 months of non-stop protests